Hey guys, tonight we dive into one of the more curious tales from biblical lore, Satan's strange obsession with Moses' body. Picture the scene: you're deep in the desert, the sun is blistering and the wind is kicking up sand in every direction, but there's something otherworldly about the air, something heavy, almost ominous, like you're walking on the edge of a cosmic cliff, and if you look down too far, you might just see something staring back at you. Yeah, this one's going to be a ride. And if you think this tale is just about some old dusty scrolls and long-forgotten names, buckle up, because you're probably in for more than you bargained for. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, drop your location and time in the comments. I'm always curious about where my listeners are from. And just so we set the vibe, now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The battle for Moses' body isn't just some obscure side note in biblical history. No, it's part of a much deeper and far more mystical conflict between good and evil, and it centers on one of the Bible's most famous and enigmatic figures, Moses, the lawgiver, the prophet who led the Israelites out of Egypt. This is the man Satan decides to battle over. But what's he after? And why now, of all times, after Moses has passed on? Was it really about the body itself, or was it something more symbolic? Historians still argue whether Satan's obsession with Moses is more of a theological conflict or part of a larger spiritual scheme to undermine humanity's redemption. On the one hand, it seems that Satan was aiming to rob Moses of his legacy, to perhaps discredit the great leader of the Israelites. On the other hand, the body of Moses was in itself a vessel, a physical object with spiritual significance that could play a role in a greater cosmic struggle. It's strange, right? Satan, the adversary, the accuser, fighting for the body of someone who helped lead an entire nation out of slavery. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If we look closely at the biblical context and the layers of meaning behind this unusual interaction, we might begin to understand why the fight for Moses' body wasn't just another moment of petty evil, but rather a deeper reflection of the cosmic battle that transcends earthly understanding. As we settle deeper into this cosmic tale, let's rewind a little and look at the peculiar circumstances surrounding Moses' death. It's strange that for all his monumental importance, his death is almost as mysterious as his birth. I mean, think about it. We know exactly where many great figures from biblical times were buried, but not Moses. His burial site remains a divine secret, hidden away somewhere in the land of Moab. And the Bible, it's frustratingly quiet on this. Deuteronomy 34:5-6 records that Moses died in the land of Moab, but it also says no man knows his burial place to this day. Like, why the mystery? Was it just to keep his resting place sacred, or was something else going on here? Historians still argue whether this secrecy had more to do with the need to preserve Moses' legacy, or with the nature of his spiritual status. In ancient Israel, burial sites were often viewed as sacred places, and the idea that Moses' final resting place was kept secret is in many ways an act of preserving his sanctity. The Bible's lack of details on the matter hints at the fact that at the time his body was so powerful, so imbued with divine significance, that it couldn't simply be left for anyone, especially not Satan, to lay claim to. Could this cryptic burial have been an early defense mechanism against the forces of evil? After all, Satan, as the accuser and adversary, thrives on corruption, destruction, and control. What better way to lay claim to a figure like Moses than to desecrate his body? And here's where the plot thickens. Satan throughout the Bible is often depicted as a being with incredible access to the heavenly realm and the power to influence earthly matters. Yet in Jude 9, we see Satan trying to claim Moses' body, something that stands out for its peculiar detail. This passage is cryptic, but it makes clear that Satan didn't want just anybody. He wanted Moses. So what's the deal with that? Was it because Moses held some unique power, or was it about something much more symbolic? Historians have debated for centuries whether this confrontation between Satan and Michael the archangel was literal or metaphorical. Was this a physical battle over a physical body, or was it a representation of a deeper spiritual conflict? The story begs the question, why would the devil care so much about a human body, especially one of a deceased leader? Perhaps the answer lies in the idea that bodies, particularly those of powerful figures, are seen as vessels of spiritual authority. Moses wasn't just any man. He was chosen by God to deliver the Israelites from slavery, to receive the Ten Commandments, and to shape the future of a nation. So his body wasn't just a physical object. It was a symbol, the remains of a man who was central to the narrative of Israel's redemption. And that's something Satan, the great adversary, would never want to let go of. Think of it this way. Bodies in the ancient world, especially those of leaders, were often believed to retain spiritual power. Remember how the Egyptians treated their pharaohs' tombs as sacred sites? Well, in a similar way, Moses' body could have been seen as a holy object that carried immense spiritual significance. If Satan could claim that if he could corrupt that symbol, he could essentially undermine the entire legacy Moses had built. But there's more here than just a body. There's the matter of what Moses represented. Moses was not just the deliverer of laws or a great prophet. He was, in the eyes of the Israelites, the very conduit through which God's covenant with his people was made. If Satan could erase Moses from the picture entirely physically and spiritually, he would be striking at the heart of Israel's identity and faith. It's not just a body, it's a symbol of divine authority and human redemption. And as we'll see, Satan has always fought through history and theology to destroy these symbols of divine power. Now let's talk about one of the most puzzling and mysterious references in the New Testament. The brief but significant mention of Satan's battle for Moses' body in Jude 1:9. It's a single verse tucked away almost inconspicuously, but it's a key piece to this whole strange puzzle. The verse says, "But Michael the archangel, when he disputed with the devil and argued about the body of Moses, did not dare pronounce against him a railing judgment, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" Right off the bat, this raises a few eyebrows. First of all, why would Michael, one of the most powerful beings in the heavenly host, need to step in and defend Moses' body? Michael, after all, isn't just any angel. He's considered a warrior archangel, the leader of the heavenly armies. His role throughout Scripture is clear. He fights on God's behalf in the spiritual realm. But here, he's in a seemingly surreal standoff with Satan over the body of a man who's already dead. What was it about Moses' body that required such divine intervention? Historians still argue whether this passage is symbolic, representing a broader theological battle between good and evil, or if it was meant to depict an actual literal dispute. Some scholars believe that this event, despite its brevity, illustrates the ongoing cosmic war between God's angels and Satan's forces, a war that transcends human history. Others, though, see it as a more practical matter. Satan was trying to take possession of Moses' body, to corrupt it, and by doing so, destroy Moses' legacy. Whatever the case, this moment is a rare glimpse into a confrontation that feels almost too surreal to be true. Now, there's a curious detail to note here. Michael doesn't engage in the fight himself with any fiery rhetoric or accusations. Instead, he says, "The Lord rebuke you." This response is particularly interesting because it shows that even Michael, a powerful being, refuses to engage Satan directly. Instead, he defers the judgment to God. Why, some theologians suggest that this act of humility highlights the authority of God over Satan, reinforcing the idea that while the forces of evil may rise up against the good, only God himself has the ultimate power to rebuke and overcome such darkness. And let's not overlook the fact that Satan in this passage is seen actively fighting for possession of a body, something which might seem oddly mundane at first, but is actually incredibly significant. The body of Moses wasn't just any body. It was the body of a man who had been central to God's plan for Israel. This wasn't about a random burial, it was a spiritual contest. Moses' body, the very vessel that had once been the medium for God's direct communication and leadership, now represented a key to the heavens, or depending on which side you're on, a key to the forces of evil. Satan's fixation on Moses' body can be seen as an attempt to undermine God's authority by gaining control over this sacred object. Throughout Scripture, Satan often targets what is most holy, most divinely significant, as a way to corrupt and distort it. It wasn't just about having the body, it was about what that body represented. If Satan could defile Moses' remains, he could strike at the heart of Israel's spiritual heritage. But let's take a step back here. The fact that this dispute occurs in the first place implies that there's something extraordinary about Moses. He wasn't just any man. He was a prophet chosen by God, and his legacy had left an indelible mark on Israel's faith and future. Satan, knowing the importance of Moses' role, couldn't stand the idea of allowing the body of such a figure to remain untouched, holy, and untarnished. His attempt to wrest control of Moses' body can thus be seen as part of a larger, more existential struggle to undermine Israel's faith and identity. Now consider the fact that this battle takes place after Moses' death. Moses had already led the Israelites out of Egypt. He had delivered the law, and his life had already been marked by miracles and divine intervention. Yet even after his death, Satan isn't ready to let go. The lesson here is clear. Some legacies, particularly those of divine origin, are so potent that their power transcends even death itself. That's why Satan is willing to fight for what remains of Moses, and why the dispute over his body is so significant. The forces of evil were fighting for a piece of the divine, a piece of God's plan that was still alive in Moses' legacy, even after his physical death. Now let's take a closer look at Moses himself, the man at the center of this cosmic struggle. Why did Satan, of all people, target Moses for such a fierce contest over his body? To understand that we need to think about Moses, not just as a man, but as a symbol, perhaps one of the most powerful symbols in biblical history. Moses wasn't just a prophet. He was a lawgiver, a deliverer, and the ultimate bridge between the divine and humanity. In many ways, Moses is the quintessential representative of God's will on earth. Born into slavery in Egypt, he rose to lead his people out of bondage, performing miraculous feats along the way, like parting the Red Sea, bringing down manna from heaven, and receiving the 10 Commandments directly from God. His life was not only marked by extraordinary events, but by a direct, intimate relationship with God. God spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. This special relationship set Moses apart from almost every other figure in the Bible. But here's the twist: Moses' significance went beyond his actions. He represented God's covenant with Israel. God's promise to the Israelites was mediated through Moses, and he served as the key to the establishment of Israel as a nation. Moses didn't just lead the Israelites out of Egypt. He laid the foundation for their spiritual and moral framework. The law that Moses received from God on Mount Sinai became the cornerstone of the Israelites' relationship with God. The 10 Commandments, etched in stone, were more than just laws. They were a divine covenant, and Moses was the living symbol of that covenant. This makes Moses' body much more than just a dead man's remains. His physical body represented a living, breathing testimony to God's promises. If Satan could somehow desecrate or corrupt Moses' body, he could potentially undermine the very foundation of God's covenant with Israel. The physical body of Moses, bound by the laws of death, still carried the divine imprint of God's power and purpose. This made it a target for Satan, who throughout biblical history has sought to subvert and destroy any element of God's plan for humanity. Historians still debate whether Moses' unique position in Israelite history is why Satan would have taken such an interest in his body, or whether it was because Moses' life, and thus his death, represented a pivotal moment in the larger spiritual drama of humanity's redemption. Whatever the case, there's no denying that Moses' life and legacy made him a prime target in Satan's ongoing effort to derail God's divine plan. Theologically, Moses could be seen as a figure who acted as a type of mediator between God and the Israelites, similar to how Jesus Christ, centuries later, would act as the ultimate mediator between humanity and God. For Satan, corrupting Moses was an effort to disrupt the very channels through which divine salvation could flow to Israel. Moses' death, therefore, wasn't just the passing of an individual. It was a spiritual event that marked the end of an era and the completion of a divine mission. The Israelites had been led out of Egypt, and the laws were delivered. The fact that Satan would fight for Moses' body after his death speaks volumes about the importance of Moses as a symbol of divine intervention and covenant. In a way, Moses' very body was a reminder to Satan of the failure of his own rebellion. After all, Satan had once been a heavenly being, cast out of paradise, and now here was Moses, human, flawed, yet chosen by God to be the deliverer of an entire nation. That contrast, that reminder of divine justice and mercy, would have been a constant thorn in Satan's side. Furthermore, Moses' unique role as a prophet and lawgiver put him in direct opposition to Satan's agenda. Satan thrives on chaos, rebellion, and the disruption of divine order, while Moses represented the establishment of God's law and order. In the spiritual realm, this opposition would have been stark, with Moses' life standing as a testament to God's power over chaos, sin, and rebellion. And even after Moses' death, his body still held that power. By attempting to claim Moses' body, Satan was essentially trying to claim victory in a battle that had been lost long ago, a battle over authority, legitimacy, and divine favor. Moses' legacy, encapsulated not only in his laws, but in his very being, was a reminder to Satan of what he could never have: God's approval and divine purpose. If Satan could erase that, if he could desecrate Moses' body, he might finally achieve the victory he had been striving for ever since his own fall from grace. This cosmic struggle was about more than just a physical body. It was about trying to undermine the very foundation of what Moses stood for: God's authority over sin, death, and chaos. All right, we've set the stage with Moses' extraordinary life and death, but now we need to shift gears and explore the symbolic significance of the body itself in spiritual warfare. Bodies, particularly those of great leaders, are not just inert vessels. In the ancient world, they are seen as symbols of authority, sanctity, and spiritual power. For Satan to go after Moses' body, it's essential to understand how bodies played a role in the battle between good and evil. In biblical times, the human body was often viewed as the vessel of the soul and the means through which divine purpose was executed on earth. For figures like Moses, the body was not just a temporary container. It was a sacred instrument of God's will. Consider how throughout the Bible bodies were used to fulfill divine purposes. The body of Moses himself was the medium through which God's laws were delivered, and the body of Christ would become the vessel through which humanity's redemption was achieved. In this light, the body represents more than just flesh and bone. It's a point of connection between the physical and the spiritual realms. Now, Satan has always sought to corrupt and pervert anything that reflects divine authority. Throughout the Bible, Satan is described as the great deceiver, the one who seeks to twist and distort truth, beauty, and holiness. The human body, especially the body of someone as important as Moses, would be an ideal target in this cosmic war. If Satan could corrupt or desecrate a body, he could symbolically take control over the spiritual power that body represented. Remember, this is a spiritual war, and the physical world is merely a reflection of deeper unseen battles taking place in the heavenly realms. To claim a sacred body would be a way of asserting dominion over what it represented in the divine order. Consider, too, the ancient beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife. In the ancient Near East, the preservation of the body was of paramount importance. Egyptians, for example, went to great lengths to ensure that the body was mummified and carefully preserved to protect the soul in the afterlife. In contrast, the Israelites under Moses' leadership adhered to a different view of death. While they didn't practice mummification, there was still a deep reverence for the body, especially when it came to the dead of significant figures like Moses. By keeping Moses' body hidden and protected, it ensured that his legacy would not be corrupted or taken by forces of evil. Historians still debate whether the desire to preserve Moses' body had more to do with his role in Israelite culture or the belief that bodies carried spiritual weight. After all, this wasn't just about any person, this was Moses. His body was seen as a direct representation of his relationship with God, and his death marked the end of an era in Israel's history. If Satan could taint or claim his body, he would have been claiming a piece of God's divine plan, a reminder to all that even in death, Moses' influence remained. This also touches on something deeper. Bodies are not simply physical objects in biblical lore. They are spiritual battlegrounds. Satan's attack on Moses' body is not a mere act of desperation. It's an expression of the ongoing battle for dominion over creation. By targeting the body of Moses, Satan aimed to challenge the divine order. It was an attempt to wrestle control over a vessel that had once carried God's laws and presence. This is a reflection of the spiritual warfare we see throughout Scripture, where the forces of darkness constantly seek to corrupt what is holy and true. And let's not forget Michael's involvement in the story. The fact that the archangel Michael was called upon to defend Moses' body underscores the importance of the physical body in spiritual warfare. Michael didn't just show up because Moses' body was a relic. He intervened because Moses' body, despite being dead, held significant spiritual power. It wasn't merely about the flesh, it was about what that flesh represented: a channel for divine truth, holiness, and authority. The archangel's intervention signals that even in death, Moses was still a key figure in the cosmic battle between good and evil. This battle over Moses' body can thus be seen as part of a larger cosmic struggle, where the physical world reflects spiritual realities. Satan's fight for the body isn't just about a physical corpse, it's about control over the spiritual legacy that the body carries. And as long as Moses' body remained hidden and untouchable, it would continue to stand as a reminder of God's power, authority, and plan for his people. This is why Satan was so fixated on claiming it to disrupt the memory, the power, and the symbol that Moses' body represented. Now that we've explored the deeper symbolism behind Moses' body, let's zoom out and consider the broader cultural context of ancient Near Eastern beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife. These ancient cultures had incredibly intricate views on what happened after death and how the dead, particularly powerful individuals, were treated. These beliefs help us understand why Satan would fight so fiercely for Moses' body. In many ancient civilizations, the dead were believed to retain a certain power or essence that could affect the living world. The Egyptians, for example, were obsessed with the afterlife, and their elaborate burial rituals were meant to ensure that the deceased would have a secure and prosperous journey to the afterlife. They believed that the body needed to be carefully preserved and protected to allow the soul to continue its journey and to retain the power it had in life. Pharaohs considered divine rulers were particularly revered in death, their bodies carefully mummified to preserve their spiritual power. Similarly, the Israelites, while not practicing mummification, still held strong views about death and burial. In Deuteronomy 34:5, Moses is described as having been buried by God himself. This divine intervention in Moses' burial underscores the sanctity of his body. God taking responsibility for Moses' burial suggests that the body had significant spiritual importance, and it needed to be handled with reverence beyond human reach or control. God's direct involvement in Moses' burial made it impossible for any earthly or spiritual force like Satan to claim the body without facing divine opposition. Historians still argue whether this divine secrecy surrounding Moses' burial was a symbolic act to show his unique relationship with God, or if it was a precautionary measure to prevent desecration. The fact that no one, not even the Israelites, knew where Moses was buried would have been a powerful statement. In ancient times, knowing the resting place of a great leader or prophet meant having a form of control or influence over their legacy. If someone could access or desecrate the body, it could be seen as a way of challenging or undermining the authority of the individual. This is likely why Satan, who is described as the great adversary to God's divine will, would have wanted to get his hands on it. Theologians often point to the fact that in the ancient world, the dead were more than just people who had passed on. They were thought to have an ongoing influence on the living, and their bodies were vessels for that power. By attempting to claim Moses' body, Satan wasn't simply trying to desecrate it. He was attempting to control it, to absorb the power and the authority that Moses represented. Moses wasn't just the leader of the Israelites. His death marked the end of a significant chapter in Israel's history, one where God's covenant was reaffirmed. By taking control of Moses' body, Satan could have sought to distort that covenant and pervert the very memory of Moses' leadership. But here's the interesting part. In the ancient world, the power of the dead didn't end with the burial. In fact, the dead were believed to have an ongoing influence over the living, and certain rites and rituals were performed to ensure that their power was properly honored. This is why burial sites were often treated with the utmost care. For the Israelites, the sanctity of a prophet's grave would have been essential, and they would have done everything possible to protect it from desecration. The body, particularly the body of someone like Moses, was not just a physical remnant, it was an active, potent symbol of the covenant and divine authority. Historians still debate whether this belief in the power of the dead was unique to Israel or a broader feature of ancient cultures. What's clear, though, is that Moses' body was not just a body, it was an extension of divine power. Moses' death and his burial were not to be treated casually. Satan, in his role as the accuser, would have sought to steal that power by taking possession of Moses' remains. The body represented more than just a man's death. It was the last relic of God's interaction with Israel. For Satan, keeping that relic in his possession would have been a way to tarnish God's covenant with Israel even after Moses had passed. But the divine protection over Moses' body, symbolized by Michael's intervention, made it clear that Satan would not be allowed to achieve his goal. This cosmic contest over Moses' body wasn't just about one prophet's remains. It was a contest over the ongoing power of God's covenant and the authority Moses had helped establish in Israel. As long as Moses' body was protected and hidden, it would continue to be a sign of God's power and presence on earth, undiminished by death or evil forces. By looking at these ancient burial practices, we can start to understand why Satan's fight for Moses' body wasn't just a petty power struggle. It was part of a larger spiritual battle, one that involved not just physical bodies, but the enduring spiritual power that those bodies represented. Moses' body wasn't simply the end of a man's life. It was the symbol of a covenant that would endure long after his death, a covenant that Satan could never truly destroy, no matter how hard he tried. Let's pivot now and explore a slightly darker yet fascinating concept, the idea of the iconoclast. In many cultures, the iconoclast, whether it's a person or a force, is someone who seeks to destroy or defile sacred symbols, often in an attempt to rewrite or redefine history. And in this cosmic battle over Moses' body, Satan takes on the role of the ultimate iconoclast. But why would Satan, who has already been cast out of heaven and defeated in multiple cosmic battles, still want to fight for a dead man's body? What was he hoping to achieve, really? At the heart of Satan's role as an iconoclast is his desire to destroy what is sacred, what is divine, and what symbolizes God's eternal authority. Throughout history, Satan has been the ultimate adversary, constantly working to disrupt divine order. If we trace Satan's actions in the Bible, it's clear that his ultimate goal is to challenge God's supremacy. He doesn't simply want to dethrone God, he wants to desecrate the symbols of God's rule, making them seem less powerful, less holy, less authoritative. And Moses, a man through whom God spoke directly and delivered the law to his people, was one of the most potent symbols of God's power and authority. Think about it. If Satan could get his hands on Moses' body, he wouldn't just be taking control of the physical remains of a man. He would be attempting to strip away the very memory of Moses' divine mission. He would be aiming to erase the spiritual significance that Moses held for the Israelites. In a way, this battle for the body of Moses can be seen as an attempt to rewrite the narrative of Israel's salvation. It's an attack on the very foundation of the Israelites' identity as God's chosen people, as a nation that had been delivered from Egypt by Moses under God's guidance. Historians still argue about the true motivations behind Satan's actions. Some suggest that Satan was merely trying to claim a trophy, to exert his dominance over a significant biblical figure. Others believe his motives were far more insidious. By desecrating Moses' body, Satan could have been trying to cut the Israelites off from their past, severing their connection to the pivotal events of the Exodus. If Moses' legacy could be tainted, then the very history of God's people could be called into question. For Satan, it wasn't about the body, it was about discrediting everything Moses had come to represent. This idea of iconoclasm isn't limited to Satan in the biblical narrative. Throughout history, we see countless examples of figures, movements, or powers that have sought to destroy or defile sacred symbols in order to challenge the existing power structures. In many ways, Satan's role as an iconoclast reflects this broader desire to dismantle the very foundation of divine authority. If Satan could eliminate the spiritual power embodied in Moses' body, he could make a bold statement about the fragility of divine rule and, by extension, the fragility of Israel's faith in that rule. But the real kicker here is that Satan didn't succeed. Despite his relentless pursuit of Moses' body, despite the fact that he engaged in direct conflict with Michael the archangel, Satan ultimately failed to gain control over Moses' remains. This failure is significant. It speaks to the ultimate sovereignty of God. Even in death, Moses' body was protected, hidden by God's own hand. The body of Moses, once the vessel of God's law, was a reminder to all that God's authority was unassailable even in the face of the enemy's best efforts. Now, let's go a little deeper into the psychology behind Satan's actions. What did he really hope to achieve by engaging in this battle? Satan's actions in this case reveal something crucial about his nature. He is not content to simply destroy what is good. No, Satan's ultimate goal is to distort, to corrupt, and to pervert what is holy. By trying to gain possession of Moses' body, he wasn't just trying to strip the body of its divine significance. He was aiming to warp the entire legacy of Moses. He wanted to turn a symbol of redemption into something that could be mocked and manipulated for his own purposes. The battle for Moses' body, then, isn't just a physical confrontation. It's a battle for the soul of Israel, for the very foundation of God's covenant with his people. In attempting to defile Moses, Satan was trying to rewrite the story of redemption itself. He was attempting to make God's work seem futile, to show that even the most sacred of divine acts could be corrupted. And for Satan, that would have been a victory, one that would have resonated across the generations, shaking Israel's faith in its deliverance and in the ongoing power of God. But of course, this battle was always going to be one that Satan couldn't win. As we've seen time and time again throughout Scripture, when it comes to spiritual warfare, the forces of darkness may rise up against the light, but the light always prevails. Michael's intervention, the protection of Moses' body by God, serves as a powerful reminder that no matter how hard Satan tries, he can never truly undermine God's plans. The forces of evil may fight to the bitter end, but in the end, they are always defeated by divine authority. In this way, the story of Satan's battle for Moses' body is a microcosm of the larger cosmic struggle between good and evil, a struggle that continues to play out in the world today. It's a reminder that no matter how many times Satan tries to desecrate or distort the symbols of God's power, those symbols will ultimately remain protected by the divine will. As we continue to unravel the layers of this cosmic struggle, it's crucial to consider what Moses represented for Israel, and by extension, what his death and body symbolized in the grand narrative of God's plan for humanity. To understand Satan's obsession with Moses, we need to explore Moses' role in the spiritual history of Israel. After all, Moses wasn't just a man. He was the representative of Israel's journey from bondage to freedom, a key figure in their ongoing story of redemption. Moses' life was a journey of liberation. He led the Israelites out of Egypt, away from Pharaoh's oppressive rule, through the parted Red Sea, and into the wilderness where they would forge a new identity as God's chosen people. And in doing so, Moses didn't just lead them physically, he led them spiritually. It was through Moses that Israel received God's commandments, establishing the moral and spiritual framework by which they would live as a nation. In essence, Moses was the conduit through which the covenant with God was established. He was the one who communicated God's laws to the people and established the foundation for Israel's future. Historians still argue about how Moses' death fits into the broader narrative of Israel's story. Was it simply the end of a leader's life, or was it a pivotal moment in God's unfolding plan? After all, Moses' death marked the end of the Exodus generation. The Israelites would soon cross into the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership, but Moses would not be there to see it. His death and the preservation of his body marked a crucial turning point in the biblical narrative. Moses had fulfilled his divine mission, and now it was time for a new chapter. But Satan's refusal to let Moses go to claim his body speaks volumes about how critical Moses was to the ongoing spiritual legacy of Israel. The story of Moses, even in death, had a profound impact on Israel's understanding of their relationship with God. Moses, in many ways, was the embodiment of redemption, not just Israel's, but humanity's. His role as the liberator of Israel is mirrored by the ultimate Redeemer, Jesus Christ, who, according to Christian theology, would later come to offer the ultimate redemption for all of humanity. This makes Moses' death and body even more significant. If Satan could corrupt Moses' body, he would be striking at the very heart of the redemption narrative. He wouldn't just be desecrating a corpse. He would be attempting to obscure the path to salvation that Moses' life had laid down for Israel, and by extension, for all of mankind. Moses' unique relationship with God also made him a pivotal figure in the Bible. He wasn't just a prophet like many others. He was a friend of God. In Exodus 33:11 it says, "The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend." This intimate relationship with God made Moses an irreplaceable figure in the history of Israel. and a key part of God's redemptive plan for humanity. So when Moses died, the world was losing more than just a great leader. It was losing a direct link to God. His death marked the end of a significant era in Israel's spiritual history. The fact that Satan sought to claim Moses' body wasn't just about his physical remains, it was about a desire to sever the spiritual link that Moses represented between Israel and God. By attempting to claim Moses' body, Satan was in essence trying to sever the very connection that Moses had forged between God and his people. He was trying to disrupt the narrative of salvation that Moses had helped to establish. This wasn't a personal vendetta against Moses. It was a broader strategic effort to undermine Israel's relationship with God and to make the divine plan seem incomplete, fragmented, or compromised. The fact that God himself intervened to protect Moses' body from desecration by Satan speaks to the importance of Moses in the grand scheme of divine salvation. God ensured that Moses' body would remain untouched, not just for the sake of preserving his legacy, but because Moses was a key part of God's covenant with Israel. By keeping Moses' body hidden and protected, God was reaffirming his ongoing plan for Israel, one that would continue long after Moses' death. But there's another layer to this. Moses' death was also a prefiguration of death's ultimate defeat. Throughout the Bible, death is presented as a powerful enemy, a force that separates humanity from God's presence. But Moses' death, unlike those of other figures, wasn't the end of his story. It was a transition. His body, preserved and protected, would remain a testament to God's faithfulness even in death. The fight for Moses' body can be seen as a struggle to keep the enemy of death in its rightful place, to prevent it from claiming victory over Moses' legacy. What makes this even more poignant is the fact that Moses was never allowed to enter the Promised Land. In many ways, Moses' death symbolizes the end of one era and the beginning of another. He led the Israelites to the border of the Promised Land, but it was Joshua who would lead them into it. This transition speaks to the way that each generation has its role to play in God's redemptive plan. Moses' death marked the conclusion of one phase of Israel's journey, but it also set the stage for the next, just as Christ's death, according to Christian belief, set the stage for the ultimate fulfillment of God's redemption. Satan's fight for Moses' body wasn't just a struggle over a physical corpse. It was a struggle over the spiritual legacy that Moses had left behind. The act of preserving Moses' body was in itself a way of preserving the divine promises that Moses had represented. Satan, in seeking to defile that body, was attempting to erase the spiritual significance of Moses' life and death. But the divine intervention that prevented Satan from claiming Moses' remains speaks to the enduring power of God's plan, a plan that even death cannot destroy. Now that we've examined Moses' significance and the spiritual symbolism of his body, let's take a moment to explore the fascinating figure of Michael the Archangel and his role in protecting Moses' body from Satan's clutches. The intervention of Michael is critical not just for this story, but for understanding the broader cosmic battle that plays out in the heavenly realms. Michael's role in this confrontation is more than just a mere act of defense. It's a profound statement about spiritual authority, divine protection, and the ongoing fight between good and evil. Michael is often portrayed in biblical texts as the warrior archangel, the leader of God's heavenly army. His name, meaning "who is like God," speaks volumes about his role in the divine hierarchy. He is not just any angel. He is a being of immense power, one who stands as a protector of God's people. In the book of Daniel, Michael is depicted as a protector of Israel, and in the New Testament, he is shown as fighting against Satan and his forces. So it's no surprise that when Satan seeks to claim Moses' body, it is Michael who is sent to intervene. Theologians still debate the exact nature of Michael's role in spiritual warfare. Is he simply an emissary of God's will, or is he a symbol of divine authority in action? Some scholars view Michael as a type of heavenly general, the one who leads the heavenly host in battle against the forces of evil. Others see him as a representation of God's power made manifest. Either way, his appearance in this struggle is highly significant. Michael's role in defending Moses' body isn't just about protecting a physical object. It's about defending the legacy of God's covenant with Israel and asserting God's supremacy over Satan. Michael's refusal to engage in direct combat with Satan, instead invoking God's authority by saying, "The Lord rebuke you," also speaks volumes about the nature of spiritual authority. Michael, despite his great power, does not rely on his own strength to fight the devil. Instead, he defers to God's ultimate sovereignty. This is a key lesson in understanding spiritual warfare. Even the most powerful beings in the heavenly realm recognize that ultimate victory over evil does not come through individual strength, but through submission to God's will. By invoking God's name, Michael reinforces the idea that it is God alone who has the power to rebuke Satan. Michael's role in this story isn't to assert his own power, but to make clear that the true authority lies with God. Satan may be the accuser, the one who seeks to destroy and corrupt, but he cannot touch what God has deemed holy. This is a powerful reminder that no matter how fierce the battle, no matter how relentless Satan's attacks, God's authority will always prevail. But Michael's involvement also hints at a deeper theological truth. There are battles that go beyond the physical, beyond what we can see with our eyes. The fight over Moses' body wasn't just a one-time conflict. It was a reflection of the ongoing cosmic battle between good and evil that plays out in the unseen spiritual realm. In every confrontation between Satan and God's angels, there is a deeper reality at play, a reality that transcends human understanding. The fact that Michael is the one chosen to defend Moses' body highlights the seriousness of this battle and its far-reaching consequences. Moreover, Michael's role in protecting Moses' body can be seen as a precursor to the ultimate battle between good and evil, the battle that will be fully realized at the end of time as described in Revelation. In that final showdown, Michael will once again take up arms against Satan, this time in the ultimate battle for the soul of the world. The victory in the heavenly realms over Satan's forces will echo the victory that is already assured on earth through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. The protection of Moses' body by Michael, then, is not just an isolated event. It's a small part of a much larger cosmic narrative of redemption. What's particularly striking about this confrontation is the nature of the body itself. Moses' body was no ordinary body. It was a vessel that had once been the home of God's laws and divine purpose. The fact that Michael intervenes to protect Moses' body underscores the sacredness of the human form even after death. In this sense, Moses' body isn't just a physical object. It is a divine relic, a powerful symbol of God's ongoing covenant with Israel. Michael's protection of it serves as a reminder that even in death, the sacred remains untouched by the forces of evil. Now, this brings us to a deeper point about spiritual warfare. Michael's action illustrates a key aspect of how spiritual battles work. The enemy doesn't just fight against people, it fights against the very symbols of God's kingdom. Satan's battle wasn't just about Moses, it was about the legacy. Moses represented the divine law, the covenant, and the promise of redemption. Satan's goal was to erase all memory of God's intervention in history, and in doing so, undermine the hope of humanity. In contrast, Michael's defense of Moses' body highlights how divine protection operates on a larger cosmic scale. There's more going on here than meets the eye, but this story also reflects something important for us today. In a world where spiritual battles are often unseen and misunderstood, The story of Michael's intervention reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. Just as Michael fought to protect Moses' body, so too do the forces of good fight on our behalf in unseen realms. Spiritual warfare is not just about resisting evil in the visible world. It's about recognizing that God's angels are at work on our behalf, protecting us from forces that seek to destroy us. As we reach the final stretch of this journey, let's slow things down a bit and reflect on the theological takeaways of this battle for Moses' body. What does it all mean for us today, and how does it impact our understanding of spiritual warfare and faith? After all, the story of Moses and Satan isn't just a relic of ancient history. It holds profound implications for how we view the world and our place within it. One of the most striking themes from this story is the idea that the physical and spiritual realms are deeply interconnected. The conflict over Moses' body shows that physical objects, whether it's a body, a place, or even a symbol, can carry immense spiritual significance. For Satan, the battle over Moses' remains wasn't about just getting his hands on a corpse. It was about trying to strip away the legacy that Moses represented. Moses was a symbol of God's covenant with Israel, and by defiling his body, Satan hoped to disrupt that covenant and undermine Israel's faith in God's promises. Historians still debate how much weight to give to the idea that the physical body holds spiritual significance, but the Bible certainly emphasizes this connection. From the sacredness of burial sites to the reverence of holy objects, the physical world is not separate from the spiritual world. It's a realm where the divine touches the earthly, where God's power is made manifest through symbols and physical acts. Whether it's the Ark of the Covenant or the body of a prophet, these physical things carry spiritual weight and meaning. That's why Satan's attempt to claim Moses' body was so significant. It wasn't just about the body itself, but what it represented in the larger story of redemption. But there's also something deeper to be learned from Michael's defense of Moses' body. The fact that it wasn't Moses who fought for his body, but Michael emphasizes the idea that spiritual protection is ultimately in God's hands. Michael, despite his power and authority, did not engage in battle on his own terms. He deferred to God's authority, saying, "The Lord rebuke you." This moment points us back to the central truth of spiritual warfare. It is God who has ultimate authority over the forces of evil, and it is through him that victory is won. Michael's reliance on God's authority is a powerful reminder that in our own lives, we are never meant to fight spiritual battles on our own. The victory belongs to God alone. This brings us to another important point. The ongoing cosmic battle between good and evil is real, and it plays out not just in the heavenly realms, but in our everyday lives. Just as Satan fought over Moses' body, he continues to work to disrupt God's purposes today. Satan's goal is always to corrupt, distort, and destroy what is good. His ultimate aim is to undermine the truth of God's redemption plan and to sow chaos where God has established order. But just as Michael protected Moses, we are assured that God's angels and divine power are working on our behalf to protect us from the forces of darkness. The battle may be invisible, but it's no less real. The story also shows us that spiritual victory doesn't come through brute force, but through submission to God's will. Michael didn't engage in a flashy, self-centered fight. Instead, he humbly deferred to God's authority. This teaches us that in our own spiritual battles, victory comes not through our own strength or cleverness, but through trust in God and surrender to his plans. It's a reminder that spiritual warfare is not a solo mission. We don't fight alone. God's power through his angels and his Spirit is always with us. In the end, it's God's will that prevails, no matter what Satan throws at us. Finally, the fact that Moses' body was protected, hidden away, and preserved by God is a testament to the enduring power of God's covenant. Even after Moses' death, the legacy of his life and mission was kept intact. In much the same way, we can take comfort in the fact that God's promises to us are unshakable. Just as he protected Moses' body from defilement, so too does he protect the promises he has made to us. No matter what the enemy tries to do to disrupt our lives, we are assured that God's will not be thwarted. The protection of Moses' body serves as a powerful symbol of the unbreakable covenant that God has made with his people, a covenant that spans time, death, and even the forces of evil. This brings us back to the ultimate takeaway from this story. Spiritual warfare is real, and we are active participants in it. The battle for Moses' body wasn't just a cosmic showdown between Satan and Michael. It was a fight for the very soul of God's covenant with Israel. In much the same way, every spiritual battle we face is a fight for our relationship with God, for the promises he has made to us, and for our place in his kingdom. We are called to stand firm in the face of spiritual opposition, to trust in God's protection, and to rely on his strength in the midst of our struggles. As we reflect on the story of Moses, Satan, and Michael, we are reminded that no matter how hard the enemy fights, God's plan will always prevail. Just as God protected Moses' body, he will protect us and fulfill his promises to us. The spiritual battle may be fierce, but in the end, the victory belongs to God, and that's something we can rest in with peace and confidence.